It was Saturday, and the calendar marked Lucas's 6th birthday, when everything suddenly fell apart for Mariana Lopez. At 3:20 p.m., after a short bus ride with a paper bag on her lap, she arrived in a neighborhood where cars sat gleaming in the driveways and the sidewalks smelled of freshly cut grass. She was wearing a brown coat with a hand-stitched lining, clean but worn boots, and a gift wrapped in green paper and gold ribbon. A sweater she'd knitted herself, with wooden buttons she'd chosen one by one. She was 63 years old, with strong hands from decades of work and a habit of speaking quietly so as not to disturb anyone. At first glance, anyone would have taken her for an ordinary grandmother, and that was the facade she'd maintained for years. What almost no one knew was that, after days as a waitress, cleaner, and night shift worker, Mariana had studied logistics, understood spreadsheets, routes, and suppliers. And with that silent foundation, she had built Orion Nexus, a real structure with warehouses, trucks, and payrolls. Still, that day, what she was worried about wasn't her resume or her balance sheets, but rather arriving on time, not being a burden, not attracting attention, delivering the gift, and hugging her grandson without anything going wrong. Daniel and Patricia's house didn't look like a place for a simple family gathering. From the sidewalk, music curated by a DJ played. Rental lights drew lines on the facade, and a caterer came and went through the side door with silver trays. Ringing the doorbell, Patricia opened it without hiding the sweep of her gaze that begins with his shoes and ends with his face. She made a mental note of his old coat, his unsprayed updo, his short, unpolished nails. He showed her where to leave the package and the coat without touching her, without a "so nice to see you," and led her into a room with metallic balloons, a dessert table that looked like a catalog, and people talking about investments, gyms, and long weekend destinations. Mariana looked for Lucas and found him quickly, because children are loud and real. He was running around with a cardboard crown that was already crooked and a t-shirt with dinosaurs on it, and when he saw her, he casually raised his hand. She responded with a small, almost shy gesture and looked for a chair against the wall, the place where those who don't want to be in the way sit. They offered her a glass of sparkling wine, which she gently declined and asked for water. When she finally got it, the glass was sweaty and cold, and she held it like an anchor. She knew how to stay on the sidelines. She'd practiced it all her life. But that sideline, that day, had spotlights and other people's applause that made her corner even more conspicuous. The atmosphere was deafening in its excess. The music left no room for intimate conversation, and the laughter was too loud, the kind that seeks approval more than expresses genuine joy. Mariana observed the dark suits, the expensive watches that sparkled with every flick of the wrist, the glasses casually raised by people who seemed to know no reality other than abundance. Around her, the conversations revolved around trips to Miami, kitchen remodels with imported marble, and bilingual schools that cost as much as the annual salary of any of her warehouse employees. All of this felt distant, alien, like a stage she had been forced into without belonging. In her lap, she held the gift, that green sweater. She had knitted on silent nights in front of the unlit television, and wondered if she would have the chance to give it to Lucas without anyone seeing it as an out-of-place gesture. It was during dinner, when everyone was seated at a long table adorned with artificial flowers on metal stems, that the main wound occurred. Patricia, with her calculated smile and her tone of voice projected so that every corner remained unheard, uttered the phrase that would burn Mariana for hours on end. "So, Mariana, Daniel told me you still have that little cleaning business. How sweet." The knife in the comment wasn't in the words, but in the way they were said, condescendingly, as if speaking of a child who saves holy cards and not a woman who had worked until she broke her back. Around her, a few muffled laughs confirmed the intention. Mariana felt her breath catch in her throat. She looked at her son, searching for a gesture, a defense, a simple diversion from the subject. But Daniel kept his eyes on his plate, pressing his fork as if he didn't hear anything. That silence was worse than mockery. Mariana held on for a few more minutes, her stomach tight and her back rigid, but each laugh felt like a stone. She didn't take a bite from the plate in front of her. The smell of spiced meat and expensive wine made her stomach churn. When it was time for dessert, she didn't wait. She stood up slowly, took her coat from the coat rack without anyone noticing, and walked out with the package, still in her hands. The cool air of the street hit her face like a slap of reality. She walked several blocks with her heart racing, clutching the gift to her chest, feeling that each step was a mixture of humiliation and suppressed anger. In her mind, Patricia's words repeated themselves over and over again, like an unbearable echo, and along with them, the image of Daniel, silent, absent, unable to defend her even with a look. Back in her small apartment, Mariana left the package on the table and slumped into the first available chair. For a long time, she couldn't cry. She just sat still, her throat dry and her breathing labored, as if her entire body needed to process what had happened. The green sweater, still wrapped, became a symbol of everything she had given without receiving anything in return. She thought of the endless nights of work, the tired hands scrubbing floors, the double shifts she'd taken to pay for Daniel's tuition. All of that, reduced in a second to a caricature of a small cleaning business. She felt a pang of rage that, instead of consuming her, began to push her toward a different decision. She could no longer hide behind the image of a simple woman that everyone took for granted. With her hands still shaking, Mariana got up and went straight to the bedroom where she kept a small metal chest hidden under an old blanket in the closet. She hadn't opened it for months, as if keeping it closed would allow her to remain invisible to others. With a sharp click, the lock clicked, and inside were the documents that defined her true life. The founding document of Orion Nexus, the records confirming her ownership of 87% of the company, and her position as CEO. She took the folders one by one, reviewing with her fingertips each seal, each signature, remembering the sacrifices she had made to make those pages exist. There was proof that she wasn't a woman reduced to a small business, but the head of a logistics network that provided employment and support to more than 1,700 families. She turned on her computer and, with an impulse that mixed fury and lucidity, accessed the company's internal system. She didn't expect to find anything relevant, but upon reviewing the personnel files, one name jumped out at her like a direct hit. Patricia Gomez, her daughter-in-law, was listed in the Strategic Alliances Department at Orion Nexus. She read her history carefully. In the official reports, she appeared as a brilliant employee, recognized for her modern vision and for knowing how to handle competitive environments. However, in the secondary records, those that rarely rose to the presidency, there were ignored complaints, mockery of older colleagues, disparaging comments about support staff, and a case in which she had excluded a veteran logistics officer from a key meeting, calling him an obstacle from the past. Mariana closed her eyes for a moment. The same arrogance that had wounded her at the family dinner table was recorded. Within her own company, Mariana stared in front of the screen for several minutes, her heart racing and her jaw clenched. It wasn't just a personal matter. Patricia was repeating a pattern that crossed the family and the professional. That revelation was like a spark in a dark room. It was no longer about avenging a humiliation, but about correcting something that affected so many more people. She remembered the times she herself had been treated as invisible when cleaning offices or waiting tables, and she understood that she had the opportunity to stop that cycle in her own company. That night she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Patricia laughing at colleagues, denying opportunities to those without a fancy title, and the mocking voice at dinner resonated like fuel for her decision. At dawn, Mariana made strong coffee, and with the clarity that only comes after a sleepless night filled with thoughts, picked up the phone and called the Human Resources Director. The meeting was brief and to the point. She wanted Patricia transferred immediately to the maintenance and cleaning department, without warning, and with access to the management offices blocked. "Let her figure out her place on her own," she said in a tone that left no room for interpretation. This wasn't a gratuitous punishment. It was a mirror. Patricia was going to live, even if only for a few weeks in the shoes of the people she had scorned. Mariana knew that only from that place could any learning come, if she was willing to acknowledge it. To ensure everything was carried out, Mariana opted for an unexpected plan. She dressed in the blue cleaning uniform, put on a cap that covered part of her gray hair, and mingled with the rest of the maintenance staff. It wasn't an improvised disguise. She knew every task, every route with the product cart, every aisle where the smell of detergent mingled with that of freshly brewed coffee. Walking through her own company in that role filled her with a strange calm, as if returning to the days when no one saw her, but everything depended on her efforts. In those aisles, she observed Patricia directly, without her knowing it, and what she saw confirmed every suspicion. Absolute rejection of the uniform, gestures of distaste when touching a mop, endless complaints that this job wasn't for her. Most revealing, however, was how she treated her new colleagues. Mariana heard her mock the accent of a man who had been with the company for 20 years refuse a coffee offered by a colleague willingly, and complain loudly that this is a punishment invented by someone who is jealous of me. At no point did she show any curiosity to learn, nor even a modicum of humility. She was incapable of recognizing value in what others did. Every word and every gesture confirmed that Patricia didn't see people, only steps that led her further or closer to power. Mariana, behind the cleaning cart, took mental note of every detail. She didn't need any more proof. She was ready for the ultimate confrontation. The meeting was scheduled at the presidential office for a Friday afternoon, when the building was almost empty and the murmur of the printers was beginning to fade. Patricia arrived convinced that someone had finally acknowledged that it had all been an administrative error, that the misunderstanding with her key card would be resolved with an apology and a new position. She opened the door with a confident stride, but when she saw Mariana sitting behind the main desk, her face immediately changed. She froze for a few seconds, unable to process the obvious. The woman she had humiliated in her own home was not only not a marginal figure, but the founder and highest authority of the company where she worked. The shock of reality was so strong that she had to lean back in her chair before sitting down. Mariana didn't need to raise her voice. She placed on the table a file containing copies of HR reports, employee testimonials, and personal observations of what she herself had seen disguised as a maintenance worker. One by one, the pages unfolded, each document an uncomfortable mirror in which Patricia saw herself reflected. The accusation wasn't emotional or subjective, it was backed up with concrete evidence. Mariana spoke calmly, explaining that this wasn't an isolated mistake or a bad day, but rather a pattern of behavior that demonstrated contempt for those without the status she considered valid. In the end, she presented her with two clear options: resign with a neutral reference that wouldn't taint her record, or remain in the maintenance area until she learned to treat others with respect. Patricia left that office with a distraught face, her eyes glazed not with regret, but with rage at having been exposed. That same night, she ran to seek refuge with Daniel, sobbing and recounting a distorted version, that her mother-in-law had demoted her out of personal resentment, that it was all an attack motivated by jealousy and a desire for control. Daniel, confused and still trapped by his bond with his wife, reacted furiously. He picked up the phone and called his mother, his voice laden with reproach, accusing her of humiliation and abuse of power. Mariana listened in silence, waiting for him to finish. Then calmly she explained that none of what had happened was a whim. Everything was documented, backed by reports and witnesses, and she herself had verified it in person. But the words bounced off her son's wall of disbelief, who still couldn't accept that the woman he had chosen as his partner could behave this way. Days later, Daniel and Patricia showed up at Mariana's apartment for a face-to-face confrontation. The tension was so thick they could barely cross the threshold. Patricia immediately began talking, accusing her of wanting to destroy her marriage and ridiculing her in front of the company. Mariana, without altering her tone, took out a folder of evidence and read it aloud. Every statement, every sentence recorded by human resources, every observation she herself had jotted down while working undercover. Daniel witnessed Patricia try to deny the obvious, contradict herself, blame others, and twist words to portray herself as a victim. But what struck him most wasn't the evidence itself, but the total lack of remorse in the woman with whom he shared his life. There was no guilt, only fear of losing power. Daniel's silence in the midst of that argument was no longer one of complicity, but of bewilderment. He saw his wife stumble over her own contradictions, and little by little the pieces fell into place in his mind. He remembered Lucas's birthday, the cruel remark directed at his mother, the indifference he himself had shown in order not to upset anyone. It was as if he suddenly saw the scene from the outside and understood how much pain his passivity had caused. Finally, he interrupted her with a firm tone that surprised both women. He told Patricia that he could no longer deny the obvious, that he had made his mother cry and that he had called her a disgrace without ever showing remorse. Those words marked a breaking point. Patricia lost control, raised her voice, accused him of being a traitor, and left the apartment, slamming the door violently. The marriage crumbled within weeks. Patricia's attempts to manipulate the situation by portraying herself as a victim were unsuccessful. Daniel, although hurt and disoriented, realized he had been living a facade sustained by appearances and arrogance. The divorce was inevitable. Mariana didn't celebrate the breakup. Seeing her crumble with so much pain for her son was a hard blow, but at the same time a relief. Daniel began to reach out again, visiting her on weekends, asking for advice on everyday matters, acknowledging for the first time all that she had done for him. More than words, he showed it with gestures, fixing a leaky faucet in her kitchen, cooking for her on some nights, or simply staying to chat in the living room with Lucas playing nearby. It was the most honest way to ask for forgiveness. While her personal life was taking a new direction, Mariana also knew that it was time for the company to consolidate deeper changes. After so many years at the helm, she decided to hand over the presidency to Clara, her trusted assistant, a meticulous and fair woman who had demonstrated her absolute commitment to the company's values. Mariana remained chairwoman of the board, overseeing strategic decisions, but wanted to ensure that Orion Nexus was no longer just a machine of efficiency, but also a space where the dignity of every employee was untouchable. She implemented anonymous reporting channels, mentoring programs led by veterans who had been ignored for years, and a scholarship program for employees' children, starting with the daughter of Andres, the janitor who had always worked in silence and whom few recognized. The effects of these measures were immediate. Isabel, whom Patricia had dismissed as too old to innovate, was promoted to department head and within months demonstrated that experience could make a difference in times of crisis. Hernan, the veteran who had been unfairly sidelined from a key meeting, was put in charge of the logistics restructuring and managed to double efficiency in record time. And Veronica, previously considered only administrative support, became a mentor to young talents, instilling values of respect and solidarity that began to permeate the entire company culture. Mariana, observing everything from her new position, felt that for the first time Orion Nexus reflected something more than numbers in a report. It was a living human organism sustained by the dignity of each person. On the family level, the bond with her grandson Lucas grew stronger than ever. The boy didn't fully understand the conflicts between adults, but he did feel his grandmother's real presence. He began visiting her with Daniel on weekends and spending hours in her small apartment, where Mariana made him pancakes and taught him simple card games. In his school drawings, Lucas depicted her as a figure with a crown and a huge heart on her chest. When teachers asked who she was, he would innocently reply, "She's my grandmother, the most powerful person in the world." Those unadorned words struck a chord that even the greatest business accolades had never reached. For Mariana, they were worth more than any multi-million-dollar contract. As the months passed, the wound of the initial humiliation faded, replaced by the certainty of having done the right thing. Mariana understood that what was truly important hadn't been exposing Patricia or her actions, but rather winning back her son, setting a different example for Lucas, and leaving the company with a structure based on empathy and respect. Every day, she became more convinced that her legacy wouldn't be written in balance sheets or growth figures, but in the cultural transformation she had driven and the values she had instilled inside and outside her home. Real power, she discovered, wasn't sitting at a CEO's desk, but rather raising her voice in defense of the invisible and having the courage to maintain dignity when others chose to remain silent. Mariana learned to look back without resentment. She understood that the humiliation she suffered that birthday night had been the trigger that forced her to stop hiding, to reveal the true magnitude of what she had built. For years, she had preferred silence, convinced that being discreet kept her safe from judgment and envy. But in that silence, she had also given way for others to define her as nobody. That night, when she was ridiculed in front of strangers and saw her son remain silent, she understood that the time had come to reclaim her full identity, not just as a mother and grandmother, but as the woman who had built a company from nothing, and who now decided to use that power to teach respect. Calmly, he accepted that his greatest victory wasn't having exposed Patricia or the business changes that remained as a legacy. The most significant thing had been the restoration of the bond with Daniel and the seed of dignity planted in Lucas. He would grow up knowing that true greatness isn't measured in evening gowns, luxurious cars, or pompous titles, but in the way one treats others. In that human legacy lay the strength of his entire life, the certainty that the most real power isn't that which is flaunted, but that which is silently wielded to protect those without a voice.